Good afternoon, everyone. It's May 3rd, 2019. I'm Eric. I'm here at shtfplan.com. However, this comes from Michael Schneider of the Economic Collapse blog. Nearly 102 million Americans do not have a job right now worse than at any point during the last recession. Wouldn't it be horrible if the number of Americans without a job was higher today than it was during the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009? Well, that's actually true. Now, before I go any further, I would argue that that recession has not ended, period. As you will see below, nearly 102 million Americans do not have a job right now, and at no point during the last recession did that number ever surpass the 100 million mark. Of course, the U.S. population has grown a bit over the last decade, but as you will see below, the percentage of the population that is engaged in the labor force is only slightly above the depressingly low levels from the last recession. Sadly, the truth is that the rosy employment statistics that you are getting from the mainstream media are manufactured using smoke and mirrors, and by the time you are done reading this article, you will understand what is really going on. Now, I'm going to stop again. Just a point here. If the mainstream media was truly out to get Donald Trump, wouldn't you think they'd want wouldn't you think they would want to report the actual statistics so they can blame him? Just saying. Before we dig into the long-term trends, let's talk about what we just learned. According to CNBC, initial claims for unemployment benefits just rose by the most that we've seen in 19 months. Initial claims for state unemployment benefits jumped 37,000 to a seasonally adjusted 230,000 for the week ending April 20th, the Labor Department said on Thursday. The increase was the largest since early September 2017. And considering all the other troubling economic signs that we have been witnessing lately, this makes perfect sense. In addition, we need to remember that over the last decade, lawmakers across the country have made it more difficult to apply for unemployment benefits and have reduced the amount of time that unemployed workers can receive them. In reality, the unemployment situation in this nation is far worse than the mainstream media is telling us. And there's a lot of other stuff that's far worse than the mainstream media is telling us. When a working-age American does not have a job, the federal number crunchers put them in one of two different categories. Either they are categorized as unemployed or they are categorized as not in the labor force. But if you add both of those categories together, and I've said this in an earlier video, you get the actual number of people who are not working. At this moment, we are told that only 6.2 million Americans are officially unemployed, and that sounds really, really good. But that's only half the story. What the mainstream media rarely mentions is the fact that the number of Americans categorized as not in the labor force has absolutely exploded since the last recession. Right now, that number is sitting at 95.5 million. When you add 6.2 million officially unemployed Americans to the 95.5 million Americans that are categorized as not in the labor force, you get the grand total of 102 million Americans that do not have a job right now. And if that sounds terrible, it's because it is terrible. Yes, the U.S. population has been growing over the last decade, and that is part of the reason why the number of Americans not in the labor force has been growing. But overall, the truth is that the level of unemployment in this country is not that much different than it was during the last recession. John Williams of Shadowstats.com tracks what the real unemployment figures would be if honest numbers were being used. And according to him, the real rate of unemployment in the United States at the moment is 21.2%. Now they've figured out different ways of crunching these numbers to manipulate the population into believing that things are better than they really are. And that is down from where it was a few years ago, but not by that much. Another honest indicator that I'd like to look at is the civilian labor force participation rate. In essence, it tells us what percentage of the working age population is actually engaged in the labor force. Just before the last recession, the civilian labor force participation rate was sitting at about 65%, and that was pretty good. But then the recession hit, and the labor force participation rate fell below 63% and stayed between 62 and 63% for an extended period of time. So where are we today? At this moment, we are sitting at just 63%. Now, does that look like a recovery to you? It's not. If you like to claim that we have had a very marginal employment recovery since the last recession, that is a legitimate argument to make. But anything beyond that is simply not being honest. And now, the U.S. economy is rapidly slowing down again. And most Americans are completely and totally unprepared for what is ahead. The good news is that employment levels have been fairly stable in recent years. But the bad news is that unemployment claims are starting to shoot up again. A number of experts that I'm hearing from expect job losses to escalate in the months ahead. Many of those that are currently living on the edge of financially suddenly won't be able to pay their mortgage or their bills. Just like the last recession, we could potentially see millions of middle-class Americans quickly lose everything once economic conditions start getting really bad, as if they're not bad enough already. The economy is not going to get any better than it is right now. As you look forward to the second half of 2019, I would make plans for rough sailing ahead. So, I don't know. I've read this article earlier this week. I don't remember if I covered or not, so do apologize if I already talked about this. But man, this is really a sign of troubles ahead, along with many other things. So, even if I did, you should probably hear it again, because things are not getting any better, like the mainstream media claims. And as I pointed out earlier, if they really had it in for Donald Trump, you would think that they would report honest numbers so they can blame him. Anyway, hope you all have a good day. Until next time, kill the state, live free.